All right, well, let's get started. Glad you're here. Obviously not Jeremy. Well, I say obviously. I preached not too long ago, and Jeremy afterwards said somebody came up to him and said, "I really enjoyed your sermon." I don't see the resemblance. That's why I'm growing this. I'm hoping that's enough. I don't know. My family hates it, but yeah. So Jeremy had something he was going to do with the youth tonight, and he thought he needed to be there. So he asked me to fill in some conversations he and I have had just over the years about youth in general, and more specifically, some of the stuff I have observed at my time at OC. Since we've been back, which is now 13 years-ish or so from Brazil, I've been at OC doing something to some degree that whole time, and have gotten the opportunity to spend a lot of time with, I call them kids, but young adults-ish that are there, college students. So I'm calling this an insider's perspective, not implying any degree of expertise besides the fact that I'm the world-renowned leading expert of my opinion. Besides that, that's as much as it is. But I do feel like I've had many, many conversations with young adults there, college students, and I have did some reading on some research from Barna, which is slightly dated a little bit now, I think within the last 10 years. But then I've been reading some academic articles on some studying I'm having to do that are kind of tapping into some of it. So I want to share kind of from that perspective. Here's young adults, and here's some challenging things they're experiencing. And hopefully you can kind of retroactive be like, all right, here's where my kid is. Maybe looking at possible future challenges, we can talk about some proactive solutions now. So, sounds old-timey, but the world, something wrong with the world today, which actually it's not. Every generation could say it, and probably has. You can go as far back as whenever Genesis 3 happened, and there was something wrong with the world moving forward. But even in the time of Jeremiah, so we're like 600s before Jesus, Israel was at a mess. I mean, a mess. They were at the back end of a lot of bad choices, and because of that, in spite of Jeremiah's warnings and other prophets leading up to that, and in spite of the fact that about 130 years before, the northern tribes, 10 of them, had almost been annihilated by the Assyrians because of disobedience. Now we're just, about 100 years later, and here we are with South, they called it Judah, facing the Babylonians for the same reasons. Disobedience, idolatry, injustice on a kind of social level, corruption, even the sacrifice of children to foreign gods. Like, it's a horrible mess. And in spite of Jeremiah's warnings and other attempts, God says that the Babylonians are going to come, and they're going to, the temple is destroyed in 587. Most of them are relocated forcibly, those that weren't killed. And so now you find Israelites spread throughout this pagan land with no home, temple destroyed, completely unsure what was going to happen next. So the world's been a mess for quite a long time. But I think it's still fair to say that the world has changed and continues to change. And so I want to use that imagery of a Babylonian world to kind of describe maybe some of the challenge we're still facing today. Because Babylon becomes symbolic, all the way you can go to Revelation, where there it's using Babylon, not just tapping into the backstory, but also using Babylon to describe Rome, and using Babylon in a future sense to any other nation that might fit the bill, as a warning that this kind of brokenness is sadly repetitive. So, here's some things. Like I said, Israel found themselves not in Jerusalem anymore, forcibly relocated and living in Babylon, having to figure out what do we do next. And so we're going to take that imagery here in a second. But let me just give you some statistics. Even though teenagers today have probably as much resources as ever in terms of like religious activities, youth group, trips, camps, classes, and not just folks like, filling in and giving their best. Like you got people with professional training to be a youth minister and all this stuff. But in spite of that, with all that activity, the 20s are the least active group. So how do we go from the most active group to the least active group? We're just, like what's happening there? There's all kinds of possibilities. 61% of young adults that have been churched in their teens are now spiritually disengaged. And I say disengaged because I think there's more nuance to the idea of like, they're not interested anymore. There's still degrees of interest, but there is a disengagement that is statistically noticeable. So once again, that's a pretty big number, and I think something for concern. And in the 60s, which I'll just say that excludes all of us, right? In the 60s, 5% of live births were to unmarried women. Currently, that's about 42%, broadly speaking, and in certain demographics, up to 70%. So 7 out of 10 kids are born to single parents, right, to single moms. So there's a lot of change there. In the 70s, around 70% had completed the transition to adulthood by 30. Now that's only about 35%. And even now, I'm taking a childhood development class, and several years back, there were different behavioral scientists that kind of categorize these stages. And what used to be adolescence is now being stretched longer, and what used to be young adult is now being pushed further. And so now they have longer adolescence, and then they have what they're calling in between emerging adults. So it's like giving adulting a try. And it's like this broader, so by the time that they complete all these check boxes that, grandpa and grandma was checking by the time they were, 18, now you're 25, 30, kind of moving into some of that. So that's not all bad, but that's different, and some challenges can come with that. So this was not surprising, but somewhat sad, and I think this is true. Instead of turning to parents or older adults or even church for advice, they are just looking out to their peers, and most often, peers, in a social media setting. They're going to TikTok for advice. Sometimes in class there, I'll say like, yeah, what your kids doing now? What's that TikTok that y'all are all about? And they laugh at me because they think I'm stupid, but I'm just messing with them. And this is really sad to me. Young adults are more likely to consult the internet than their minister about religious issues. So it's like, I just go Google it somewhere and see what pops, or some video on. Once again, this isn't just life questions, it's about religious issues, and they're still going elsewhere. So there's even a shift in where one gets information. Even though they're probably as tech savvy as any other generation before them, more, they're not very truth savvy. And what I mean by that is, you can get on there and search whatever you want, but how do you know what's fact? What's truth? What's accurate? What's conspiracy theory? What's completely lies? What's science? What's not? How does one fact check? Does one even care? If it sounds right enough, let's just go with that. So there's been no generation up to this point in time in history ever that's had so much access to knowledge. Yet I don't know if we're any smarter. I mean, I'm just not sure we're really getting anywhere productive with it. And now we're just going to give our thinking to AI. And y'all should watch The Terminator because it's coming. This is my humble opinion. All right. So not only that, we're really a culture of misplaced confidence. Young adults' ability to grow in their faith withers when they persist. And I really think this is generically true, right? There's always the danger there. I think we're in a culture of narcissism, entitlement, and out of proportion self-confidence. Like it's all about me. And it's all about me. It should be about me, my rights, whatever I want to do, whatever I feel like, whatever I want to construct, whatever, you know. And we just applaud that to no end. And I think there's been some consequences from that. According to a study by the Barna Group, the vast majority of church-going teenagers, they said they knew a lot, but then when actually asked on specifics, they knew very little about Bible. Which I'm like, how's that happening? Once again, they're not asking little, heretic pagan children. These are like church-going folks. And it's been fascinating to me. In one sense, it's kind of a good thing because it makes me look smarter, but on the other sense, it's sad. I'll teach stuff at OC, and I have kids come up to me afterwards. They're like, I've never heard that, ever. And I'm thinking, wow, did you grow up, in the woods somewhere? And no, these are church-going people. So either I'm extremely brilliant, there's a good possibility, or I'm not sure what we're teaching them, or they're just not listening. Right? They're just not connecting the dots somehow. Or maybe we're not helping them connect the dots. So there's something happening there. And young people, I think, have been aided by a whole lot of sources, in good part by culture, that glorifies them as the inherently beautiful, valuable, cool, independent, able, smarter, like the arbiters of all that's right and fair and good. It's young people. Whatever you feel, whatever you think is right, it's like there's a shift, and I don't know if that's for the better. And I've seen this in conversations with young people. I had a conversation not too long ago. A former student who been married recently, and I think has been basically having an emotional affair and really contemplates should stay in marriage, and everything he said was basically just about how he feels. And I'm sitting there thinking, all right, where should I go with this conversation, And it's really, and I don't think it's out of ill intent, but it's really self-centered. And I think there's a lot, blame can go around any direction you want to. There's also a misplaced, people's confidence is misplaced. This confidence, and I think the damage of this, as I've already said, it is misplaced, but the damage of this is that they're just the arbiters of all things that should be right or wrong. Like they get to decide. And that's been a problem since Genesis 3. Humanity wants to be like God, like our God. We are gods. But the focus now, I think, is like even to younger people. You decide. Without any influence of parents, or you don't need parents, you don't need friends, you decide. Either young people now are so much more brilliant than ever, which is a possibility. When I was like 15, I'm not even sure I could, tie my shoes. I was just looking back, I'm thankful they didn't let me make many lifelong decisions. Well, then there's that, right? So who knows? It's just, I think it's a huge misguided emphasis to allow young people to make such lifelong decisions Not that there isn't a sense of agency, and that's important. You want to nurture and further that along. But it's also fueled this misconception that older people are outdated, irrelevant, disconnected, don't know anything, don't have any substantial thing to contribute, maybe besides repeating some old stories, over and over. And like, yeah, Grandpa. I mean, so it's like older people are most indifferent, unnecessary. And I think if the story of the Old Testament has taught us anything, that's a mistake if the generations are disconnected. So in Proverbs, my son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life for many years and bring you prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and good name in the sight of God and others. Yet, if we're not interested in learning anything from past generations, we're just all doomed to repeat the same mistakes or maybe even create new ones. And I think there's more and more for a lot of reasons, and technology has really accelerated that. Social media and so forth, the generations are disconnected, probably broader than ever, possibly. A marketed society, we live in a culture of marketing. We really live in a world that seems more interested in the quality of the advertisement than the quality of the product. It's just really what's being sold and how creatively and powerfully it's being sold to us, convinced to us. And we just take that and we just run with it, even though the product is, quite just bad quality. But the advertisement is impressive, and we're just buying and buying and buying, and I don't even literally mean just spending money. Here's some of the criticisms that Barna and others have researched and found out from former Christians, right? These are former Christians that they have against the church, and thus probably why they're former. Christians demonize everything outside the church. If it's not in the church, it's the devil. It was on TV the other day. Y'all ever watch Waterboy? My mama said, foosball's the devil. Well, it's almost sounds like church, like everything's the devil. Well, there's probably a lot of accuracy to some of that, but the way it's portrayed, younger people just aren't buying that, and it's actually pushing them away. Christians, in their mind, Christians are afraid of everything pop culture, especially movies and music, which I think we've done that a long time, right? Didn't people think Elvis was the devil, like, Grandpa? And so I think that kind of there's just something about the older generation fears a lot of the things that are new, and the newer generation just thinks everything old is just that, old and irrelevant. So I think that's always been somewhat a thing, but I wonder if it's more intensified now. Christians maintain a false separation of sacred and secular. That's a criticism. Yeah, I think there should be no separation. I don't think Jesus thought, okay, well, I think I'm done with my ministry today. Now I'm just going to do some secular stuff. I think he saw it all as through the perspective of why he was here, through the good news, through the kingdom of heaven, through the presence of God. And I think I get the church and state separation. I'm fine with that, because every time church and state comes together, we lose church and it just becomes a tool and often weaponized. So I'm good with that. But I think we've taken that concept and we've allowed that to just permeate the rest of our lives. As if somehow, okay, this is just me at work and now here's me being religious. I think it should all be through the worldview of follower of Jesus. Christians do not want to deal with the complexities or reality of the world, or at least the nuances of it. In other words, we sanitize it too much to where it's either 100% this or 100% that. I don't know if it's ever been that simple, right? You understand the greatest criticism Jesus received was from the religious leaders of Israel. Like, I don't even know if Jesus would be welcome at our churches. So I think and to be fair, we're not doing this out of, I think, mean spirit. That's politics. It's so deceptively simplistic. They're to blame, do this, vote here, I'm going to say. It's not that simple. It's never, ever that simple. It's not just black and white, 100% this, 100% that. But we don't like to be in that nuanced gray area because somehow we're like, absolute truth, which absolute truth does not mean simplistic. Right? I don't think Jesus was wishy-washy, but he was all about the nuanced. He navigated in ways that made a lot of people uncomfortable. And I think we've been afraid of the complexities, and so we come out simplistic. Christians are overprotective and unreasonably detached from the world. I mean, to whatever validity, there's some of the opinions of those that aren't sitting with us any longer. And these are young people that decided not to be engaged, or at least not to be engaged in what we're selling, right, and what we're presenting. Valid or not, I think it's worth contemplating. But we are called to make a difference. I mean, that's the basic premise of what it means to be human. We're created to, by the power of God with us, in a collaborative, relational way, we are to be transformative into the mess of the world. So that's the reason we're created. Yet, we somehow hide or just detach or don't want to get messy. So when Israelites found themselves in Babylon, they then had to come up with a Jerusalem faith in a Babylonian world. They didn't have the option. I don't want to be in Babylon. Well, everything else has been destroyed. This is the world you're in. And so what are you going to do about it? And I think too many times we have been either reactive instead of being proactive. We react, and when you react, you're letting whatever is making you react basically be in control. So what would proactive look like? Another way I want to put it as a tension is overprotectiveness versus isolationism. And isolationism. So for example, it's characterizing everything that's not Christian as evil. I think that's reactive. And maybe I should put Christian. It's not that simple. We're in a world created by God, but that has been hijacked by evil. Does that make sense? So it's not everything evil hijacked is evil. It's just been hijacked. So I think we've made that mistake. Evil isn't just creating new things. It's hijacking it, twisting it, and then making us, we're under the illusion we're creating great things. Instead of that, maybe we should use some discernment to help young people understand that other people are not our enemies. And whatever people might be struggling with, they're not the enemies. Do you understand that? They're not the enemies. Because to say they are the enemies is to point the finger at you, humanity. Now, the enemy uses humanity, but that doesn't make them the enemy, right? And I think Jesus' words on the cross, Father, forgive them for they not know what they do, makes that point. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't doing evil things, but Jesus saw people with a very different perspective. And because we haven't been able to teach that to our children, they get out there, meet folks that fit under whatever category we think is evil, and they're good, nice people that mean well and are friendly, and they just, our kids are like, I don't know, they're not evil. And they don't know what to do with that then. So then they just validate everything, which I think is also a mistake. So we need to do a better job at that. I think isolationism and overprotectiveness makes strict and generalized rules about the world. Like I could do a whole series on this. And Paul got beatings because of this. Legislation is not the way to push evil out. You just got to be clear about this. In Jesus, we have better rules. Legislation is not the mechanism, even in Jesus, to push evil out. 614 points to the law for about 1,500 years, and just read the Old Testament and see how well that works should make the case. Yet Paul gave his life to explain that that's not, laws isn't the mechanism. It's not, the problem isn't what the laws were trying to do. The problem is it's a limited mechanism to achieve those goals. So what Jesus came to do is to get at the heart of it and use a different mechanism, which is love of God, love of others. That's the motivation, not law. The presence of the Holy Spirit in us, not through legislation. A community of faith that's supportive, the Word of God, the example of Jesus. There's other mechanisms that actually help us achieve what the law was trying to do, but very limited. So if we just want to create all these rules, our kids are inevitably going to see the limitations of that and are going to start getting frustrated. And I don't mean, let your 5-year-old do whatever it wants. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking inevitably we can't not just use rules to get our kids further along. We have to get deeper into the nuance of it. We have to help them discern. We have to help them understand. We have to help them know that isolationism isn't the way, that there's ways to be kind yet not validate. There's ways to love and yet not approve. There's ways to do that messiness that rules isn't the way. Thoughts? Good?
As Proverbs said, the teaching should be on your heart. It doesn't say your mind.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes perfect with that.
Try.
The internet is knowledge. Like you got all these facts and statistics, and then all of a sudden you think you're smart, but you don't have the applied intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that understanding in
Yeah.
your heart. It's on access these things that you think make you intelligent,
Mm-hmm.
make you more narcissistic. You think you have
Yeah.
this wealth of information, but it doesn't create intelligence or understanding
Mm-hmm.
of the heart.
Yeah, no, I agree. And our kids, and I've had conversations with students all the time, the way they feel is huge. It's a big factor. And for us to just say that's stupid, that's not enough. That's not going to convince them. So we have to, and I think the Bible does, it's not just reason or feelings. I think it is more messy than that. Jesus didn't come just to articulate a better truth. He came, in John's account, he says, I am the truth. So that's a relational, interactive, emotion, messy connection in the depths of the human condition kind of reality. It's not just Jesus came to say more brilliant things. It's much more than that. Yes?
Just to add, I'm the youngest of 4 boys, and I always joke, by the time I came along, my parents were tired of explaining things, so it was black and white. Mm-hmm. You drink, you're a drunk. You smoke, you're a smoker.
Yeah.
You speed, you're a speeder. Yeah. And so my personality plus that type of teaching, it took me through going through OC, mm-hmm. through even young adulthood, to discern of what you have choices. It's not so black and white. And through that process, I looked at the world and people in that, like, oh, look at that speeder. Mm-hmm. Look at that person. And so, yes, I could see, my parents would probably say something different, but
sure.
That's how I took it.
They meant well.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think that's true.
But I could see where someone without a foundation can be pushed away by that and look at the world in a harsh way, and not a very forgiving, way.
Yeah, and I think parents, I think a lot of folks get twitchy about this because this nuance is also used out there in a way really to get people to, in a very camouflaged, crafty way to eventually get you to just validate and accept all things, which is not what I'm saying. All right? Just because it sounds similar does not mean it's the same message. It's the same thing of like the idea of love. Is love important in the Bible? Was Jesus on board with this? Love God, love others. Did that sound like it was important? So folks get out there and say, see, you should just love others. And what they mean is you should not pass judgment. You should not accept all things. Like love has no bounds. Okay, let's put a pin on that because yes, love is important. Yes, Jesus was to love. But Jesus said love others as I have loved you. So it's not just the word. Right? Plus, it's one of the most unhelpful words ever because I love Becky, I love church, I love Jesus, I love my cat, I love, pizza, long walks on the beach, bubble baths, and occasionally my brother-in-law. You just hope that's all different love, right? You just hope that's all different love, right? But it's the same word, and so we get twitchy because we're like, oh, here we go again. We need to parse things better instead of just throwing it all out of fear.
I agree with that to an extent because I kind of probably find myself passing on some of the stuff I was taught to Clayton. But at the same time, we're so bombarded with all this stuff.
Yeah,
You gotta
nonstop.
accept this. I mean,
Yeah.
dadgum homosexuals have hijacked the dadgum rainbow and turned it into a sign for them, which is took away the sign of God's promised stuff and never flood the world again. And it's just, it infuriates me to the point it just only hands on people because that's not. Yeah, we're living in the Babylonian world right now, and we don't want our kids to have to be influenced by all that, and they are, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
And of course, Scripture says, you got wolves dressed as sheep coming in, don't let them in, and I think sometimes we kind of probably overstep our bounds on that, how we deal with it, but.
Well, and that's my point. Unless you go off the grid, and there's, sometimes I'm like, yeah, let's do that. You go off the grid, disconnect from everything, go buy a plot of land and, far off and just live you and your family in Jesus. If you're not doing that, then there is no version of our kids aren't going to be influenced by that world. It's like, let's prepare them to navigate that world. So, yeah.
Just adding to that, so much of that overprotectiveness and isolation, as parents, the way we model that for our kids, does that then breed anxiety in them as to, oh my goodness, like that was something we just weren't supposed to even talk about, touch, stay away from. In the same way that we pass on anxiety in many other ways that we share that generation, right? So sometimes that hard black and white thinking of that's awful, stay away from that, we're not even going to talk about it, gives it more power.
Yeah,
and
it
puts
does.
it on a plane bigger than God, right? And rather than saying like, we receive our strength and our courage from God, because we're going to see these things, and here's why God doesn't want us to participate in.
And sometimes too, we say things out of a many years of experience, a lot of knowledge of Bible, and we then simplify all that and say, oh, that's wrong, that's bad, that's stupid. Yet our kids haven't yet gotten to that understanding, and we just want them to take it because I said so. Now, I don't know about your kids, but because I said so, hasn't really worked well, right? Hasn't really worked well. Like, we have to navigate, explain, and guide them along. How did we even get to that? Right? and I think sometimes we're thinking here and they're here in their thought process, and we don't know how to bridge that gap.
Well, that's a good question. How do we? I mean, you're right when they're talking about these, some of the complexities of the world. You know, growing up, when I grew up, I mean, there's things we just didn't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of sheltered.
Yeah.
You know, so how do you, man, 'cause I get the same thing, you know, well, you gotta have a better answer than I told you, so, or, 'cause I said it.
Yeah. I tell my kids, you just don't realize how big a deal Daddy is. And that's somehow that's still not enough. You know, they actually kind of laugh and give me.
My kids, I use a disease, they're germaphobes by nature. So I use, like, sin is a disease.
Mm-hmm.
And some things can be good.
Yeah.
Then be contaminated by sin.
Sure.
And so you may see something you think is good, and maybe it is good at some point, but at some point it's contaminated and no longer.
Yeah. No, I agree. Skip a couple here out of.
Personally think people are far too focused on what their kids are doing instead of why. Why usually matters a lot more.
Mhm.
It's like if you do something that just like, what in the world?
Yeah.
Their heart was in the right place. They just didn't have the right experience to do it.
True. I think one of the things we've done out of overprotectiveness, isolationism, and actually just the way we do society these days is we've professionalized everything. There's experts for everything. I don't know if you've noticed something over the pandemic. Not a lot of folks really cared about experts anymore. And I think that's a broader issue than pandemic. I think we've gotten fed up with that. And so now we go to who knows where, whatever you find like is good information, and if it makes sense to you, that's good enough. So now we shifted away from experts to I think it makes sense. And there's some challenges with that as well, but I think we've done that with church in the sense of like, you have to be a minister, you have to be a missionary, you have to go to school to be this, that, the other, and then, you know, youth, you just need to go play with some stuff and let's go to Six Flags and let the professionals deal with it. I don't think that works well. We're all supposed to be active, right? We're all supposed to be a priesthood of believers. Like there's no, you know, everybody else go sit down and I'll let the professionals do this. But that's sadly the way we do the mechanics of a lot of church. That's the impression we give. And once again, not out of ill intent, but that together with society. And broadly speaking, most of us are fed up with experts, our kids even more so. And so if we present that model to them, instead of this is a collaborative thing, even though I might have more experience, let's together talk about this and grow together, and you can come along and help, and we can do ministry together. They see us as experts and just bundle us with all the other experts they're fed up with. Let's see here. Sometimes we seek to oversimplify the tough and complicated issues of life, like suffering, purity, modesty, failure, relationships, media, doubts, LGBT, and on and on and on. We give simplistic answers. We're like, because I told you so, and those people are just stupid, and it's in the Bible, and that might have gone and might have been enough somewhere back in the day, but it's not now. It's not now. So instead, we need to be more transparent. We need to talk about the human condition. We need to normalize the fact that we're all struggling, and it's only by the grace of God. And then we need to articulate and help them understand the process you get to these things. And I put there in context, that's a pet peeve of mine. I thank my dad for that. I think part of the problem is we've too long have taught Bible as topical sermons and classes, VBS stories, and decontextualized verses. We've almost approached Bible as Twitter. Just pull something out there, throw it against the wall, and it's in the Bible, and then that should be enough. And the comments I get the most of from church-going kids that are now sitting in a Bible class at OC that is like, I never heard that before, is when I try to teach things that are in context. One story connects to the other, that connects to the other, that is furthering a narrative along that's culminated in Jesus. And they're just like, oh. That, I think, brings people more in than like, I heard, 5 lessons on the evils of, chewing and drinking and spitting and, and hanging out with those. That I don't know if that's enough. It might be early on, but I think as they move along, we need to get more complex with it and be more story, big picture Bible story narrative, like kind of teach it that way.
Well, I think a lot of that is because we probably haven't been really taught in context.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that note. This isn't blaming anybody. Just even when I was in college, when we talked about context, all that really meant is you better be reading the 3 verses before and the 3 verses after. But I think there's more to that. The Bible is brilliantly written and organized.
Well, what I was trying to think, I don't think we've been taught, I know you did a class one time,
Yeah.
taught how to study the Bible
Yeah.
and to make it all flow, because I have a hard time with that. I kind of do the same thing. Not that I'm pulling out, I'm using this to justify or not
Sure.
justify or whatever. It's just, I have a hard time trying to, some stuff, and that could be a failure on study
Yeah.
and all that, but.
Yeah, well, with the 2 minutes we have, here's a couple things I think we're struggling with. I think we're often struggling to promote a Christianity that has been sanitized from humanity. Let me tell you about King David and how awesome he was. I'm sorry, have you read about King David? The man had some issues. So did everybody but Jesus. And I think we sanitize it. There's some stories in the Old Testament, I'm like, I hope I don't have to teach it. It's really naughty and sticky and weird. But we sanitize humanity out and we present this glorified heroes of faith, kind of Christianity, pie in the sky. And then they get out there and they're like, I don't know what to do with this mess now that I'm in. So I think we need to present it in the more messy, sticky thing that it is, because it's dealing with humanity. Jesus didn't just float around. He was here in the mess, right, and had to deal with some real issues. I think because of that, and some simplistic approaches, decontextualized, overreactive, overprotective, I think we lose credibility. I think we lose credibility with our kids. Once again, not out of intention, but just, and we do need to be prophetic. Here's where that path leads, and it's not just because Dad said so. Let me show you this in the Bible, and it in a story format. The Bible is filled with things that humans thought was a good idea because of the craftiness of evil and led to disaster. A lot of the things we're still trying today. So you don't even have to be like, let me criticize today these people. You just be like, let me tell you this story in the Old Testament. And it inevitably will connect with what folks are doing today. It's a more nuanced, less aggressive, yet I think biblical way of still being prophetic. You just point your finger at people today like, I'll make a very quick political statement. Oh, no, I'll still make it. Most of the candidates that run in the political cycles today, the ones that are the most reasonable, level-headed, are never the ones that win. Because we're just like, you need to be more intense, and you need to say this, and put your finger in people's faces and call people out. Okay, that's fascinating, and it makes for great reality TV, and then we go and vote for folks. But our kids are not buying that. We need to be more careful, more tactful, and yet prophetic in a way that doesn't put them on the defensive. It actually gets them to listen. Does that make sense? Okay, on that wonderful political note, go ye and live a Jerusalem faith in a Babylonian world. And Jeremy will be back with you next time, so you can be thrilled for that.
I think it's not just simply sort of loss of integrity, but teaching our